Hey, STEM Lab, Mr. Santella back with this week's social emotional lesson. We're going to take a break again from Cultures of Dignity. We'll get back to that next week. This week, I want to talk to you about work ethic, also known as grit. Work ethic is defined as the habits you create that allow you to work hard and reach your goals, even when the work you are doing becomes difficult. Persevering when things get hard. Grit is being able to keep working toward a goal and overcoming obstacles, even when it's hard. Grit is also not giving up even when you really want to. Those two terms sound pretty similar. Well, guess what? Work ethic and grit are synonymous, which means you can use them interchangeably. They basically mean the same thing. Here are some characteristics of having a good work ethic or having grit. Perseverance, having a growth mindset, embracing failure, glows and grows. So knowing what you're good at and what you need to work on. Taking pride in your work and understanding that your natural ability doesn't matter when it comes to work ethic or grit. Now we're going to go over each of these in a little bit more detail to help you understand what each means so that you know, well, this is something I'm good at. And then you can reflect on, well, this is something I need to work on. So how to build a good work ethic or grit, starting with perseverance. Perseverance means continuing to work even when the task is hard. This is a term that should not be new to you. I've heard this term used hundreds of times at STEM Lab. Perseverance is a great character trait just for life in general. When something gets hard, you don't give up. Now, you may take a quick break, you may go for a walk outside, but you come back to it and you keep working even though it's hard. Growth mindset, yet another term that should not be new to you. This is something that I taught in the 3 years I taught fourth grade at STEM Lab. So almost all of the middle school should know what growth mindset means. And I know the current fourth and fifth graders have heard this term as well. And this is understanding that skills and intelligence improve with practice and studying. Now, I've said this before in a video previously. Practice makes permanent. Practice doesn't make perfect. I personally don't believe there's such a thing as perfect, but practice makes permanent. So if you're constantly practicing a skill or you're practicing, by studying a concept, math, reading, writing, science, whatever it is, your brain will actually grow new neural pathways. It's called neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity means your brain grows, it changes. You can become better at something. You can become more intelligent in a certain field or whatever it is you want to be better at. If you practice, you will become better. You're not just born and then that's how smart you are. You don't reach a certain age and all of a sudden you can't become better or smarter at something. That's not how it works. Growth mindset is truly a thinking of, well, I can't do this yet. Okay, it's not this, well, I'll never be able to do it, so I'm just going to give up. No, it's, I'm going to try this and get better at it because of neuroplasticity. That's science. That is how your brain works. Embracing failure. Understanding that failure is an opportunity to learn. All right? I used to tell this to my students all the time. Fail. First attempt in learning. When you fail at something, all it is a chance for you to learn from it and be better the next time. That's all it is. And you might fail multiple times. Thomas Edison failed hundreds of times in inventing the light bulb, but if he would have given up, we would have never had a light bulb. He learned from each iteration and it helped him eventually create something that is one of the greatest inventions of all time. Failure is an opportunity to learn. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Glows and grows. So understanding what you're already good at and what you need to work on. This is a hard skill for a lot of people, especially the grow. Like we seem to know what we're good at, but getting feedback on what we need to learn can sometimes be hard. And your teachers are a great resource for this. When you turn in an assignment and they give you feedback, they're not pointing out what you need to grow on or what you need to improve on to be mean. They're doing it as an opportunity for you to become smarter at it, to become better at it. That's all it is. So being able to reflect on what you're good at and what you need to work on is another way, right, to have a good work ethic and to have grit. A person who takes pride in their work is a great characteristic of good work ethic and grit. So a person that wants their work to be high quality. You turn in an assignment, you get some feedback. It's not exactly the score or the grade or whatever that you wanted. Well, you have a choice. I can just not do it again. I can just take the grade I've been given, or I can take that feedback. I can go back and make my work even better. Nothing in education is really final. You always have the opportunity to improve. Now, your grade might not improve, but you'll learn by going back and improving your work. Here's one that's really, really important to understand. Your natural ability doesn't matter when it comes to work ethic and grit. Work ethic and grit is inside of you. It is not something you're just born with. All right, you have to really put forth the effort to have a good work ethic and to have grit. Now, there are certainly people out there who are good at everything, and that's fine, but that's such a small percentage of people. The majority of humans are not naturally good at everything they try. Sure, they might be good at a couple things. Like, for example, when I was younger, I was really good at math. I really didn't have to try at math. But when it came to reading, it was a struggle, and I really, really had to try. I had to have a good work ethic. I had to practice reading a lot more than I ever had to practice math. But because of that good work ethic, because of that grit, I'm a pretty good reader today, right? That neuroplasticity, that growth mindset, they all come together to help build that work ethic and grit. So why are we talking about work ethic and grit? What does it have to do with what we're doing right now? Well, it is an absolutely essential skill for your success now and your success in the future. It's a lifelong skill, okay? When you have those asynchronous days, that's when you really need to have work ethic and grit. No one is there making you do your work. You need to do it. And it can be hard to motivate. Believe me, I get that. Work ethic and grit helps with that. It helps you fight that urge to just give up. Like I said before, you might need to take a break. You might need to step away from your work for a little bit, but good work ethic and grit brings you back because you want to have quality work. You want to be successful. You know that this is an area I need to grow in. That is so important. When you have independent work time in your class, you need to have good work ethic and grit because, again, it's independent work. It's just like asynchronous work, except you're in the classroom. You're doing it on your own. No one is going to sit there and tell you, you need to do your work. You need to have good work ethic and grit to complete that independent work. When things don't go as planned, right? So work ethic and grit isn't just about school or about doing a certain task. It's also a mental state. When something doesn't go as planned, you need to have grit to get through that, right? Somebody does something that you're not expecting. You need to have grit in order to get through that and learn from it. Change that we don't want. So we're all experiencing that. School is different now than it's ever been. Or excuse me, school is more different now than it's ever been. And that's a change that we didn't want, but we have. Well, we can sit there and complain and just do nothing, or we can pull that grit that we have and work through the challenge, right? It's a change we don't want, but it doesn't change that we still have a responsibility to our education, right? To our future. Change that we're not ready for. So there's always change coming, always. The thing is, we can't always predict it. And that's kind of ties back to that change we don't want, but change we're not ready for. That happens all the time. Your teachers are working harder now than they have ever worked in their teaching careers, right? They weren't ready for it, but because of their work ethic and their grit, they're still able to provide you a quality education. That is a great example of changes that we don't want and changes we weren't ready for. But because of work ethic and grit, you still have a chance to be a successful scholar. And as I had stated, having work ethic and grit is a key to being successful in the present and in the future. We're going to end this with watching a video, a TED Talk. All right. From a professor who studied grit and really talked about above everything, above intelligence, above natural ability, everything. The thing that makes anybody successful in life is grit. All right, so go ahead and sit back and we'll watch this quick video.
When I was 27 years old, I left a very demanding job in management consulting for a job that was even more demanding, teaching. I went to teach 7th graders math in the New York City public schools. And like any teacher, I made quizzes and tests, I gave out homework assignments. When the work came back, I calculated grades. What struck me was that IQ was not the only difference between my best and my worst students. Some of my strongest performers did not have stratospheric IQ scores. Some of my smartest kids weren't doing so well. And that got me thinking. The kinds of things you need to learn in 7th grade math, sure, they're hard. Ratios, decimals, the area of a parallelogram. But these concepts are not impossible. And I was firmly convinced that every one of my students could learn the material if they worked hard and long enough. After several more years of teaching, I came to the conclusion that what we need in education is a much better understanding of students and learning from a motivational perspective, from a psychological perspective. In education, the one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school, especially for kids at risk for dropping out. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
One thing that Professor Duckworth said that I think is really, really important to understand. Grit is about the big picture, okay? It is not about, well, I gotta get this assignment done right now because I have to, otherwise Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so is gonna give me a bad grade. Understanding that your education now and the things you are learning now will help you in the big picture of high school and college and whatever profession it is you do. And even if you don't go to college, that's okay. But to have grit now teaches you to have grit when you're an adult, right? That's so important. Seeing the big picture. It's hard sometimes. Right now, you're like, oh, I've got a week's worth of work. I've got to get it done. Yes, you do. But why do you need to do it? Well, because we're building this foundation of your academics, your education, so that you can move on to the next level of education. And someday, you're going to be done with your education. And you're not going to have to worry about that. But you're going to have to worry about having grit and having work ethic. Because when you get a job in the real world, your bosses, whoever it is, they want you to have a good work ethic. They want you to have grit. And who knows, maybe you are the boss. Maybe you're an entrepreneur and you create your own business. That doesn't happen unless you have a good work ethic and you have grit. All right, scholars. Here's what I have for you. We're going to go back to Flipgrid or Google Form. 3 questions. Answer them either on Flipgrid or in the Google Form. The questions are simple. What is work ethic and grit? What areas of work ethic and grit do you need to work on and why? And what areas of work ethic and grit are you already good at? All right, scholars. Until I see you next week, have a good rest of your week. Bye.